Programming Weekly, Episode 2, recorded January 18th, 2013. Hello, I'm your host, Ryan Murphy, and welcome to Programming Weekly, the show where I try to teach you how to write programming code in Python. If you've ever programmed before and you've never seen the show, you may want to go back and start at Episode 1. Otherwise, if you've seen the show and you want to learn more, or you just want to learn about today's topic, then welcome. On today's show, we're going to cover lists. But before we get started, I want to talk to you about YouTube comments. I encourage you to leave comments, ask questions, tell me what you want to learn, or tell me how good or bad I'm doing. Give me feedback. It'll help me make this a little better, or I'll try to make it as much better as I can. But there's one thing I don't want you to do. And somebody actually did this about a day before I recorded this. Don't post your entire homework assignment. I'm not going to answer all your homework questions for you and send you the code because you won't learn anything. Instead, you should ask me specific questions about the questions. Don't give me the exact problem. Ask me a question about the part of the problem you're having trouble with. How do I create the data structure to store this or something else? I don't know. But don't just ask me the questions flat out because you won't learn anything. And it defeats the whole purpose of me spending the time to create this. So, now that that's out of the way, let's get started with Python lists. Python lists are data structure. They're used for, storing data and variables and things like that. And if you've written in other programming languages, you might be familiar with arrays. Python lists are very much like an array, but they do have their differences, and in my opinion, they're a little better too. So, let's start off here. We have our idle open, our Python IDE. And like I said in the last episode, you can use whatever you want. I just use this sometimes because it's convenient. Alright, let's create a list. It's extremely easy. Like any other variable, you can call pretty much whatever you want as long as it starts with a letter and not a number. And just like other variables, you can't use any of the Python keywords. So let's call our list list. Now notice that I'm spelling it with a Y. And that is because LIST is a keyword. You see how it turned purple. Now if you're using idle, keywords will turn purple if you're not supposed to use them as a variable. So it's a very good idea to try to stay away from those for variable names. I have had cases where it has worked if you've used a keyword, but you could get very unexpected results. So let's go to our misspelled list. Alright, so we have our variable name. Let's see, we'll make that equal to, and Python lists use square brackets. So we're going to have our empty list, and we'll have it equal, open square bracket, close square bracket. That is our list. It has 0 items in it, but nonetheless, it is a Python list. Now, let's start. You'll want to add some things to it. Now, other languages sometimes have restrictions like if you have strings in there, you can only have strings. If you have numbers or integers, you can only have integers. If you have float numbers, then the whole list has to have floats, or a whole array has to have floats. Python doesn't care. It'll let you use whatever you want. So, let's start adding some things here. So, let's create a list of sides of a die. Alright, fairly simple. So, we know in sides of the die, if it's a 6-sided die, we have 1 through 6. So, one of the functions of a list is append, and what append does is it does exactly what it sounds like. It will add an item to your list. So let's start with number 1. You want to add the number 1 to it. And we'll want to go up to 6, so I will just type all these in. Later I'll show you how to do this a lot faster. Append 6. Alright. Now you probably want me to prove it to you that we have all 6 items in the list. So we can use the print command and it will actually print out the list just like it does any other variable. See? Now let's say you have a weird die and it doesn't have one of these sides on it for some reason. Well, you can actually remove that item from the list. So let's say your die doesn't have the number 3. It's a trick die. Alright? You can use... Actually, better yet, I'm going to backtrack on this. Let's say you want to access one of these items in your list. You don't need all of them, you just need one of them. Let's say you want the 3rd item in your list. Now intuitively, you would think, well, that'd be 3. It's in the 3rd spot. But indexes of Python list start at 0. So if you want the 3rd item, you actually want to subtract 1, and that will get your index. So you want the 2nd index in your Python list. So in order to get that, you can type print list bracket 2 close bracket, and you hit enter. It will return 3. Alright, pretty simple. Now, one neat thing you can do is, if let's say you want to assign whatever's the 3rd item in the list to another variable. So we'll have x equals list 2. Okay, so we print x, it's 3. Let's say you don't want that 3rd item in the list. So we can actually do del list. You know, del's short for delete. If hopefully you got that. List 2. So that will delete the 3rd item from our list. So now I can print the list, and 3 is missing. Now let's look at what x equals. It still equals 3. But that number is no longer in the list. But now, what do you suppose if I print list 2 again, what do you think will pop up? Because the 3 is gone now, so it's no longer in the 3rd spot. It should come out to 4. And sure enough, it does. Now let's say you're writing a program and you need to know the length of the list. You want to know how many items are actually in it. So you can use the length function, which actually will work on strings as well as lists. So we'll do length of list and then hit enter. We have 5 items in the list. Because we had deleted 3 from the list, we now have 5 items in the list. Now let's say you know that there's a specific item in a list, but you don't know where that is in the list. So let's say I want to know where in the list is the number 5. I can type in list.index close parentheses 5. We want to know where 5 is. And it returns It is 3, and that will be the index. So here's the third index. So we can do list, just to prove it, we'll do list 3, and that returns 5. Now the index function will return the first occurrence of that object or item that's in the list. It won't show you where all of them are. You'll have to write a function to do that. But we haven't gotten into that yet, so I won't cover it just yet. Alright. Now that we have list figured out, I'll show you some other lists that we can play with here. Let's destroy our list. We just do list, open bracket, close square bracket, hit enter, and we print list just to make sure. Yep, and it's empty. Let's add a list of names. So we'll have a list of a couple names here. Actually, I'll show you a fast way to add your whole list of names, so you don't have to do the list.append several times. So we'll just do a list of names of people I need to buy presents for their birthday for. Alright, so we'll have our list, we'll call it names. Names equals, open bracket, and if I can type, we can get this. There we go. And now remember, strings must have quotes around them, so we'll have to buy something for Bob, Kevin, Greg, Nellie, and Nancy. I'll move my cursor out of the way there. Now we have a list of names. And we could do the same thing if we want to know who do I need to buy a present for second. I can do names 1 because we want the second one in the list, and we get Kevin. Another thing about indexing, let's say you want to start counting from the end of the list. You don't want to start counting from the beginning. This is where it gets a little tricky. Now 0 will always be the first one in line. But if, let's say I want Nancy, but I don't know how long the list is, but I might know that she's at the end. I can do names -1, and that will pull up the last one on the list. And you can actually decrement that, decrease, you know what I mean. We go names 2, names -3. Now, what if you try to go somewhere outside of your list? You use an index that's too high or too low. This will throw an error, a list index out of range. And the same thing would happen if you went down too far. It won't circle back around. So it's a good idea to be very careful. That's why you want to use the length function. That way you know that is how long the list is, and you don't try to write a program that's going to go less or greater than what your indexes are. Now remember, the length is not going to give you the greatest index number. It's telling you how many objects are in the list. So just because it says the length of names is 5, but if I try to bring up names index 5, I'm going to get index out of range. So when you're doing any sort of conditional, you'll want to make sure you always subtract 1 from that length when you're trying to compare something to the length, unless you're using less than. Which actually brings me to my next thing we should talk about. Let's talk about if statements. If statements are fun. If statements are good for when you want to run a piece of code based on a certain condition. Now in Python there are two booleans, and as all programming languages there are two boolean values. You can have true or false. Some of the conditionals that you can use are less thans, greater thans, and equals, or less than equal to or greater than equal to. And there are keywords like and or. So let's write an if statement. I'm going to write an if statement over here in the script. We'll write a quick script here. So let's say we have a list here. We'll have names, and I'm going to copy from over here. Okay, so we have our names, and let's say if we'll have two ifs. We'll say if the length of names is greater than 2, we'll hit enter. Now Python doesn't use those curly Q brackets. It'll use indenting. Now you can usually tab or put a few spaces in, but you have to make sure that whatever you choose, you use with the entire script. So I can use, now that this is tabbed in, I need to use tabs for the rest of the script. I can't interchange between going, okay, well I'll go 4 spaces this time, a tab this time. No. You have to either go all just a couple spaces, 4 spaces usually is a good one to go with, or all tabbed. Now if you're in an IDE, a lot of times it'll catch that you are trying to do an if statement or a for loop or a while loop, or you're trying to find a function, and it'll decide for you, oh, you need to be indented here. Alright, so back to the code here. If the length of names is greater than 2, let's have it print a message. We'll say print, you need to save money for some gifts. Alright. And then let's say if statements have also an else. You don't always have to use an else, but you could say else, and then you can put more code to have it do something else. So what the else is, if that first condition that we have up here is not met, if it returns a false, then just do this instead. So we're going to say print, meh, you don't have that many gifts to buy. Okay, so let's run this. Oh, I gotta save it here. You can't see that there. I'll just save the video folder here. To if list. Not pi. Alright, you can see it just ran and say you need to save some money for gifts. Now, let's say that I didn't have to buy for any of these folks. I just had to buy something for Bob.